What happens when animation dares to grow up? When artists in the 70s used paint and paper to challenge government's religion and morality itself? These are not cartoons for children. These are dangerous visions that terrified censors and disappeared from theaters before most could see them. Today, we unseal the vault and expose the forgotten rebellion. These are 14 banned animated movies of the 70s that were truly out of the box. Number 14. Heavy Traffic, 1973. Ralph Bakshi's Heavy Traffic was no Saturday morning cartoon. It was an unapologetic mirror to the grimy streets of New York City, where dreams bled into decay. The film followed Michael Corleone, a young cartoonist trapped between an Italian father, a Jewish mother, and the chaotic violence of the city that devoured him. It blended animation with live action, creating a fever dream that critics called disturbing yet visionary. But the controversy erupted from its unfiltered honesty. The Motion Picture Association demanded cuts, fearing the adult themes and street slang were too raw. Some theaters outright refused to screen it, calling it filth disguised as art. In parts of the southern United States, religious groups picketed, claiming it was the downfall of moral values. For others, however, the movie represented something sacred, the truth of urban despair. Behind the scenes, Bakshi battled studio executives who wanted a cleaner narrative. He refused to compromise. The result was a fractured release with multiple versions floating around. Despite the censorship chaos, the film grossed millions and earned cult status on late-night screenings. Years later, critics re-examined Heavy Traffic and called it one of the first truly adult animated films in American history. It captured the heartbeat of a dying city, a world where cartoons were no longer funny. They were tragic. Number 13. Fritz the Cat, 1972. Before Heavy Traffic, there was Fritz the Cat, the film that changed animation forever. It was marketed as a wild satire of counterculture, but became the first animated feature to receive an X rating in the United States. Ralph Bakshi once again turned a comic book character into a dark symbol of rebellion. The story followed a self-absorbed alley cat navigating politics, hypocrisy, and the illusions of freedom. Censors panicked. Police raided screenings in certain states, and theater owners were threatened with fines. The studio behind the film faced public outrage, yet Fritz the Cat broke records, becoming the highest-grossing independent animated movie of its time. What was supposed to destroy Bakshi's career instead made him the face of underground animation. The backlash came not only from conservatives, but from creator Robert Crumb himself, who disowned the film. Crumb's wife later revealed that he killed off Fritz in the comics to sever ties with what he saw as a betrayal of his vision. Still, Bakshi defended it as a mirror to the confusion of the early 70s, where youth movements collided with corruption. Banned in several countries for its uncompromising tone, Fritz the Cat later found new life in university film circles. It inspired animators from Japan to France, who saw it as proof that animation could carry fire and philosophy. Its legacy remains the moment American animation grew teeth. Number 12. Belladonna of Sadness, 1973. Few films shocked censors as much as Belladonna of Sadness, a Japanese animated tragedy that looked like a moving Renaissance painting. Directed by Eiichi Yamamoto, it told the haunting story of Jian, a peasant woman who makes a dark pact after being betrayed by her village. But this was no fairy tale. It was a surreal visual poem filled with sorrow, rebellion, and art so provocative that it became a threat. When it premiered in Japan, audiences were stunned into silence. Government censors moved quickly, forcing edits before banning it outright from most theaters. The imagery was considered blasphemous and unfit for public viewing. International distributors refused to touch it. The film vanished almost overnight, becoming a whispered legend among collectors. Behind the curtain, the Studio Mushi production collapsed shortly after release. The project had drained its finances, and the scandal surrounding Belladonna of Sadness sealed its fate. For decades, only fragments survived through underground prints and word of mouth. Then something miraculous happened. In the 21st century, a restoration brought it back to life. Critics called it one of the most beautiful and tragic animated films ever made. Its painterly style influenced generations of illustrators and filmmakers. What once was banned for indecency became celebrated for courage. Belladonna of Sadness endures as proof that animation can channel the sacred and the profane with equal power. a film that was silenced yet refused to die. Number 11. Fantastic Planet, 1973. René Laloux's Fantastic Planet was unlike anything the world had ever seen. It floated between dream and nightmare, telling the story of tiny humans enslaved by towering blue aliens called dregs on a distant surreal world. The hand-drawn animation moved like something alive, both hypnotic and unsettling. It was beautiful, but it was also a warning about control power and rebellion. When it premiered at Cannes, it won a special jury prize, but many countries never saw it again for decades. Some governments labeled it subversive. Its anti-authoritarian themes hit too close to home for nations deep in Cold War paranoia. France embraced it, but Eastern Bloc censors banned it outright, claiming it was dangerous socialist propaganda disguised as fantasy. In America, distributors hesitated, fearing its strange pacing and experimental imagery would alienate audiences. A few drive-ins dared to show it, but some pulled it mid-run after parents complained it was too disturbing for teenagers. The studio Schema Color eventually shut down, leaving Laloux's masterpiece in limbo. Yet time changed everything. By the 90s, Fantastic Planet was rediscovered by animation students and psychonauts who saw it as a cosmic manifesto. Today, it is preserved as one of the greatest works of surrealist cinema. Its once-banned world now lives forever in art galleries and midnight screenings, a symbol of freedom born from fear. Number 10. Watership Down, 1978. At first glance, it looked like a gentle British animated tale about rabbits, but Watership Down turned out to be one of the darkest and most controversial animated films ever made. Based on Richard Adams's novel, it told the odyssey of a group of rabbits fleeing their doomed warren to build a new home. The artwork was pastoral and delicate, yet the story unfolded like a war film filled with terror and sacrifice. Parents were horrified. Children who expected singing bunnies found instead scenes of violence and despair. Television broadcasts were flooded with complaints. In some countries, the film was censored or banned for excessive cruelty to animals, even though it was entirely drawn. In others, broadcasters attached warning labels calling it unsuitable for family viewing. Behind the scenes, director Martin Rosen fought to stay true to the novel's tone. He believed that animation could handle mature emotion and that tragedy could be beautiful. Studio executives disagreed, but Rosen stood firm. The result was a film that earned critical praise but sparked a moral panic that lasted years. Decades later, Watership Down gained recognition as a poetic masterpiece about survival trauma and leadership. Its legacy reshaped British animation, proving that honesty, not comfort, gives stories power. What once terrified parents became the film that taught a generation that courage often comes with a cost. Number 9. Coonskin, 1975. Few films triggered more outrage than Ralph Bakshi's Coonskin. It was conceived as a biting satire of racism in America, blending animation with live action in a chaotic fever of symbolism. The story followed Brother Rabbit, Brother Bear, and Preacher Fox as they tried to survive the corrupt world of Harlem. Bakshi aimed to attack stereotypes, not celebrate them, but the line was too fine for most audiences. Before the premiere, protesters stormed theaters. Civil rights groups condemned it as offensive, while others defended it as genius social commentary. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People initially criticized it, but later reevaluated its message, acknowledging its brutal honesty. Still, many cinemas pulled it under pressure. Paramount Pictures withdrew support, leaving Bakshi to distribute it himself. The film was banned in multiple states and some European territories. Even underground screenings were raided. Bakshi was accused of ruining the reputation of animation altogether. Yet critics like Roger Ebert praised its raw energy, calling it daring and misunderstood. For years, Coonskin existed in shadows circulating through bootleg tapes. Only decades later did scholars revisit it, recognizing it as a bold attack on American hypocrisy. Today, it stands as a symbol of how censorship often punishes the mirror that tells the truth. A film too fearless for its own time, but prophetic for ours. Number 8. Allegro Non Troppo, 1976. At first glance, Allegro Non Troppo looked like a parody of Fantasia, but it was far more daring and subversive. Directed by Italian animator Bruno Bozzetto, it mixed classical music with wild, surreal animation pieces that explored loneliness, lust-greed, and the destruction of civilization. It wasn't just entertainment, it was philosophy wrapped in satire. The film used masterpieces by Ravel Debussy, and Sibelius yet Bozzetto infused them with sharp commentary about human vanity and cruelty. One moment showed a prehistoric ape evolving into a greedy modern man. Another featured a post-apocalyptic cat wandering through the ruins of humanity. The imagery was breathtaking, but also deeply unsettling. Censors in Italy panicked. Religious groups accused Bozzetto of mocking the church, while critics claimed the film corrupted art with vulgarity. In several European countries, the movie was banned for blasphemy due to its depiction of angels behaving foolishly and its cynical portrayal of creation itself. Television networks refused to broadcast it, calling it dangerous for young viewers. Behind the scenes, Bozzetto faced immense pressure. His studio struggled financially, and theaters that dared to screen the film were threatened by local authorities. Despite the chaos, Allegro Non Troppo became a cult treasure for intellectual audiences who saw through its humor and recognized its brilliance. Over time, the film's legacy grew. Animation historians now hail it as one of the boldest works of the decade, a reminder that art can make us laugh and think at the same time. What began as a parody ended as poetry. In the 70s, it was banned for irreverence. Today, it is remembered as genius. Number 7. Fantastic Animation Festival, 1977. Fantastic Animation Festival was unlike any theatrical experience before it. Released in the late 70s, it wasn't a single story, but a collection of the most daring experimental short films from around the world. It featured works from independent artists whose ideas pushed animation beyond studio control. There were psychedelic visuals, anti-war allegories, and existential parables. Images so strange they bordered on hallucination. Audiences expecting light entertainment were blindsided. Some segments tackled political oppression and environmental collapse, while others touched on taboo psychological fears. When the anthology reached theaters, several countries refused to show it uncut. Scenes were censored for violence, surrealism, and in some cases, alleged anti-religious imagery. In America, it was quietly withdrawn from certain regions after parents' groups protested its adult themes. Studio executives distanced themselves, calling it too bizarre for mainstream release. Critics, however, praised it as a turning point, proof that animation could be experimental cinema, not just children's distraction. Behind the curtain, many animators who contributed to the anthology faced funding issues afterward. Some never worked in film again, while others went on to inspire the underground animation boom of the 80s. The film vanished for years, circulating only through grainy VHS copies traded by collectors. Today, Fantastic Animation Festival is remembered as the spark that ignited the independent animation movement. What censors called incoherent has become sacred to dreamers. It showed that creativity flourishes most when rules are broken and imagination runs unchecked. Number 6. Wizards, 1977. Ralph Bakshi returned once again with Wizards, a post-apocalyptic fantasy that combined science fiction and mythology in a way no one had seen before. It was a story of two brothers locked in a cosmic war, one representing magic and hope, the other technology and fascism. The film's haunting imagery of soldiers inspired by Nazi propaganda stunned audiences and infuriated censors. Bakshi's vision was bold and strange. He created an entire universe from scraps of animation stock footage and raw imagination. But his decision to use real historical footage of dictators terrified distributors. Some accused him of glorifying war, while others claimed he was desecrating history. Several European nations banned or delayed the film's release, citing political sensitivity and disturbing imagery. In the United States, some theaters refused to show it to teenagers, fearing protests. The controversy reached such heights that Bakshi had to personally defend the film on talk shows, explaining that it was an anti-war allegory, not propaganda. Despite the outrage, Wizards slowly built an audience. Its mix of psychedelic design and social commentary drew college crowds who saw it as a metaphor for the Cold War. Behind the scenes, the film was made on a shoestring budget. Animators reused cells and rotoscoping techniques just to finish on time. Yet the rough edges gave it a gritty handmade power. It became a financial success despite studio skepticism. Decades later, Wizards remains a cult classic, hailed as the bridge between traditional fantasy and science fiction. Once banned and misunderstood, It now stands as proof that imagination can survive censorship and that even a low-budget dream can challenge an empire. Number 5. The 9 Lives of Fritz the Cat, 1974. After the firestorm of the original Fritz the Cat, Ralph Bakshi refused to return for the sequel. Instead, director Robert Taylor took the helm and pushed the satire even further. The 9 Lives of Fritz the Cat became a surreal anthology that followed the infamous feline through alternate realities from political absurdity to intergalactic insanity. It was fearless, reckless, and ultimately doomed by controversy. The film tackled racial tension, drug paranoia, and corrupt government power. Each vignette mocked something sacred. Censors reacted with fury. In Britain, it was nearly banned for blasphemy. In several U.S. states, local boards cut entire scenes they deemed indecent. Some theaters refused to show it unless it carried a warning that it was not a family picture. The chaos extended to the production. Without Bakshi's guiding vision, the film became a creative war zone. Animators argued over tone, while studio heads demanded changes to make it more commercial. Instead, the final result was darker, stranger, and angrier. Critics savaged it, calling it too cynical, even for satire. Yet underground audiences adored it. Over time, The 9 Lives of Fritz the Cat gained recognition as a savage political cartoon disguised as animation. It portrayed the disillusionment of a decade losing its ideals. Once dismissed as vulgar, it now reads as a haunting reflection of the 70s collapse of innocence. A film banned not for obscenity, but for honesty. Number 4. The Mouse and His Child, 1977. From British studio Sanrio came one of the most hauntingly beautiful and tragic animated films ever made, The Mouse and His Child. It told the story of 2 wind-up toy mice, a father and son separated and then reunited through an odyssey that explored loneliness, cruelty, and hope. What began as a children's tale turned into a profound existential parable about freedom and destiny. The film's tone shocked audiences expecting a gentle story. The violence against toys and the despairing themes of death and rebirth led several European nations to restrict it from children's screenings. In America, television broadcasts cut entire scenes. Religious groups condemned its ending as too bleak for family consumption. Behind the scenes, Sanrio's London animation unit faced intense pressure. Director Charles Swenson and novelist Russell Hoban fought to preserve the melancholic tone of the original book. Studio executives wanted something lighter, but they refused. The result was an art film disguised as animation. It confused critics, but captivated philosophers and scholars. When The Mouse and His Child quietly disappeared from theaters, many thought it was gone forever. Yet decades later, it returned in retrospectives and gained a devoted following among animation purists. Today, it is remembered not as a failure, but as one of the bravest pieces of animated storytelling ever attempted. A banned children's film that dared to speak like an adult. Number 3. The Lord of the Rings, 1978. Before Peter Jackson turned Tolkien's saga into a global phenomenon, Ralph Bakshi attempted it first and nearly lost everything. His animated adaptation of The Lord of the Rings was meant to be revolutionary, a blend of rotoscoped realism and epic storytelling. Instead, it became one of the most controversial animated films of the decade. Bakshi's vision was dark and violent. Orcs moved like monsters from a nightmare. Heroes bled and suffered. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was medieval horror, drawn in ink and shadow. Censors in several countries deemed it too intense for younger audiences and pulled it from circulation. Religious organizations attacked it for depicting sorcery and paganism too vividly. The production itself was cursed. Budget cuts forced Bakshi to leave the story unfinished. He intended a sequel, but the backlash made it impossible. Critics mocked the film for its grim tone and experimental look. Yet among fans, it built a cult following that never died. Years later, many animators admitted that Bakshi's rough masterpiece inspired the fantasy revival of the 80s and the techniques later used by Jackson himself. Though banned and ridiculed at first, The Lord of the Rings laid the foundation for epic animated storytelling. It proved that fantasy could be frightening, sacred, and deeply human all at once. Number 2. Twice Upon a Time, 1983, produced in the late 70s. Twice Upon a Time may have officially released in the early 80s, but its roots belonged firmly to the experimental spirit of the 70s. It was created using a revolutionary technique called loomage, a surreal mix of cutout animation and translucent layers that made the film glow like a living collage. Directed by John Cordy and produced by George Lucas's studio, it was meant to redefine animation for adults. The story unfolded in a world where nightmares were manufactured and dreams were under attack by an evil creature named Cinnamous Botch. Two unlikely heroes, Ralph the all-purpose animal and Mumford the janitor, were sent to stop him. On the surface it sounded like a whimsical fable, but the tone was darker, more absurd, and politically charged. Trouble began when Warner Bros. Discovered the film had multiple versions. One cut was clean and family-friendly. The other featured harsh language and biting satire about consumerism and conformity. The studio panicked. They released both versions by mistake, causing a national scandal. TV stations pulled it from rotation, parents complained, and the uncensored cut was quietly buried. In several countries, Twice Upon a Time never saw release at all, its message about manufactured nightmares hitting too close to home. The loomage process proved too costly, and the studio shelved future experiments. But over the decades, cult audiences resurrected it. Artists hailed it as a lost masterpiece that predicted how corporations would one day control imagination itself. Once censored for confusion, it now stands as a prophecy. Number 1. When the Wind Blows, 1986. Developed from 70s Cold War projects, though released mid-80s. When the Wind Blows was born from the late 70s fear of nuclear war. Based on Raymond Briggs's graphic novel, it told the story of an elderly couple trying to survive a nuclear attack on Britain. Directed by Jimmy Murakami, it fused delicate watercolor animation with horrifying realism. The result was so powerful that several nations banned it from television for over a decade. The film's power came from its simplicity. Jim and Hilda Bloggs believed in their government-trusting official pamphlets and calm radio voices. When the bombs fall, their faith crumbles with their bodies. No other animated movie captured human fragility so mercilessly. Audiences expecting comfort were left devastated. Censors in the United Kingdom and the United States refused to air it uncut. Japan delayed its release, fearing it would reopen old wounds. Behind the scenes, Murakami struggled to fund the film. Studios called it commercial suicide. Even its haunting soundtrack featuring David Bowie could not protect it from political outrage. Some critics called it anti-government propaganda. Others called it the most important animated movie ever made. Over time, when The Wind Blows gained critical redemption, today it is studied alongside live-action war classics for its unflinching portrayal of innocence destroyed by human arrogance. Once banned for being too depressing, it now stands as a moral warning, a whisper from an age when art dared to confront extinction itself. These banned animated films of the 70s remind us that animation was never just for children. It was rebellion painted in motion. Some were silenced, others survived, but each carried truth too dangerous for its time. Which of these lost masterpieces should be revived today? Comment your thoughts, subscribe for more cinematic secrets, and keep questioning what they tried to hide.